What is going on, everybody? This is Josh back again with another video on Tech and Ish. Now, today's video is going to be about 911. Episode 4 just came out, and it was pretty good. I mean, it wasn't as good as these past episodes, but then again, I mean, these past episodes, they were giving you really good things. This one, it's, kind of slowing it down just a little bit, but there's still some crazy things that's happening. Now, it seemed like this episode mainly revolved around having siblings, having a brother or a sister, and what's the importance of having a sibling. Main reason why is because Han and her wife are trying to have a baby. They, of course, already have one, but they're trying to have another one so he can have like a brother or sister. They're seeing that he's constantly fighting with kind of like, I don't know if it was like a cousin or Athena's son, or I don't know. But basically, they see him fighting with somebody else, and they're thinking, well, if he's fighting with this one, how's it going to be when he has his own brother and sister? So it kind of like you end up seeing some siblings around here on how they actually argue with each other. You end up seeing some other siblings on how they actually love each other. And, it kind of just goes off on that. So let's get into it. So to start off with, episode begins when there's a fire drill. Now, I didn't know anything about it, like a whole fire drill, on how it actually works out. If you've ever been in a fire drill, which I'm sure you have, all you know is you step outside of the building and then they check it, or they basically see what's going on. But I didn't know what the firefighters actually have to go through it, if it's an actual fire drill. Or maybe if like the fire alarm was pulled because of some certain things. Now, I'm assuming the fire alarm was pulled. Bobby and his team were called over to check on the building, and this building is huge. So they talk about actually having to go through each floor to make sure that everything is properly functioning. And they're evacuating people from the stairs. Now, there's a ton of people just going down the stairs. And then there's this one old guy who you can tell he's having some issues with the blinking lights. I'm not too sure what it was at first, but then I started catching along with he puts his shades on and it's the noise that was bothering him. And then all of a sudden he just ends up having a seizure. He hits somebody and it's basically like dominoes. They just keep on falling and falling, and it ended up hurting about 40 something people. So it was pretty hectic there. Now, the thing that I actually thought was funny was the fact that, there was a slowing time for them to be at that fire drill. I guess there's a certain amount of minutes that they need to be there. And if they're over their minutes, then they need to talk to the fire marshal and see what's going on. Now, what I thought that was actually funny is the fact that the fire marshal was actually Buck. I didn't know what was going to happen with Buck after the last episode. I didn't know what he was going to do. I figured he was just going to come to the firehouse and just chill out and talk to them and stuff like that. But he basically got back into the fire department, but in a different kind of way, as in becoming a fire marshal. And you can actually tell he's enjoying every minute of this, because it's kind of like he's somewhat the boss of Bobby, and you can tell it's kind of irritating Bobby at the same time, because it's like he can't tell him what to do anymore because he's no longer his boss. So Buck is basically saying that they're going to write him up for being late. They're going to write him up because all those 47 people that fell, they're going to write him up for that too, because somehow it's their fault. So I actually thought that was actually kind of funny. Now, as you end up seeing some of the people being stretched out of into an ambulance, there's this one lawyer who ends up coming up to the guy and telling him, hey, if there's something wrong with you, let me know. I think that there's something wrong with the building and that's why you fell. Or, basically he's one of those lawyers who's trying to find a way to sue either the building or the owners of the building or something like that. So he's basically trying to find a client so he can actually try to make some money for them, and on top of that, making some money for him at the same time. Now, if you've been keeping up with 911, you've known Jennifer Love Hewitt's character by now, Maddy, and you know that she's actually come from an abusive relationship. Now, the past episodes on the stuff that actually happened to her were crazy. I mean, the husband or the ex-husband was trying to kill her. He ended up stabbing her boyfriend now. So it's pretty crazy. You should go check that part out. So basically, since all this stuff has happened to her, it looks like she's having some PTSD. She ends up dropping a plate in an accident, and then all of a sudden it's like she kind of has some flashbacks, some emotions start coming through. And then her boyfriend ends up basically like trying to you know, touch her and see what's going on with her, and she kind of like flinches a little bit. Automatically he knows what's going on, but she's just not opening up. She's basically saying she's sorry, she forgot that she has to go do something, and then she ends up leaving and leaves him there with a mess. Now I kind of felt like at the beginning of this that it was gonna play on within the whole episode. I thought that maybe either they were gonna talk about it, or maybe something was gonna come up that was just gonna trigger more things about it. And hey, the episode is called Triggers, so you know, who knows. So as I mentioned before in my last episode, Ronda Rousey is in this show, and I believe her name was Lena, something like that. And I don't like her acting in this show. I don't know why, it just doesn't fit. I've seen her in other things, and her acting was okay, but for this show, I don't think it's that good. Now, she ends up being into the firehouse that Buck was in, and it looks like she's actually taking his place. I mean, she ended up taking his locker, and it was actually kind of funny because, of course, I guess maybe both of their last names start with a B, but she ended up taking his B from his letter and just put the rest of her name there. And I mean, I thought that was kind of foul, but it was kind of funny at the same time, because it's like they ended up replacing Bucky with Lena, I think that was her name, Ronda Rousey. And the funny part was the fact that they actually did it right away. And not only was it funny, but it was actually messed up, because Bobby is basically telling them your spot is still saved here, but from the looks of it, it looks like he's being replaced, and Bucky is not taking this news very well. It's also kind of sad at the fact that Eddie is having to go through some issues at home. His son Christopher, who was in that whole tsunami accident, he's having nightmares, and it's kind of like keeping him up at night. But he doesn't really, it doesn't really care about that part. It's the fact that his son is actually going through this, and he's not opening up. Now, towards the end of the episode, you end up figuring out why he's actually having nightmares, and I thought it was really sad of why he's actually having these nightmares. So Maddy ends up getting a 911 call, and you don't hear anything in the beginning. I thought, now through the previews of last week, it was that car accident that was falling down the cliff. I thought that was going to be that call, but it turns out that it was actually a girl who called 911. And it looks like the reason why she actually called is because her husband or her boyfriend is abusing her. And automatically Maddy felt more involved into that situation. She knew certain things on what to do to not make the situation worse. She ends up calling back the number, and instead of saying, hey, this is 911, you know, the call was disconnected, she ends up playing it off like she's somebody from advertising, somebody who's trying to sell something. Because she knows if she would have said it's 911, then she would have, that girl who actually called 911, she was going to get her ass beat. And she knew that was going to happen. So she kind of like played it off a little bit. But she's getting invested into this. She's actually trying to find out who this girl is and where she works, where she lives. And she's actually having Athena pull the husband's records to see if he has any previous history of battery. So I kind of feel like this is going to keep on going for a couple more episodes, and I'm hoping Maddy can actually help this girl out. So the lawyer ends up calling in Buck, and main reason why is because instead of actually suing the owners of that building, he ends up suing, or he's trying to sue the city, and he's trying to sue the fire department and Bobby because of the fact of it was their fault that all of those people got hurt, because if things weren't done properly, then they would have not gotten hurt. But in reality, it wasn't their fault. It was that guy who had an accident. He fell down and he knocked everybody else down. But of course, he's just trying to make a quick buck. He's telling Bucky that he wants him to testify against the fire department, saying that they're wrong on what they did. Of course, Bucky's not trying to hear that because he's saying that they're his brothers, they're his family, and he's just not going to do that. And I was actually applauding him as he was saying this. I was actually glad that he left saying, I'm not going to help you on none of this. And I was glad, but then the very end made me be like, man, really? we'll get to that. So here comes that scene of what happened last week, towards the very end of the episode, on how that car got in an accident and it was hanging off the cliff. So I thought that, you know, of course she's getting onto her kids because her kids are fighting each other. And there's this semi truck that you see. Now I thought that she was going to turn back, predictable basically. She turns back, she's distracted, the semi truck's there, she ends up veering off the highway, and then she falls off the cliff. And that's what I thought was going to happen. But I was wrong. It wasn't predictable as I thought it would be. She ends up pulling over, and she's kind of laughing with her kids because now they're, instead of them fighting with each other, they're actually agreeing. But then it's like the cliff gave out from all that weight that she ends up tumbling down. And that's basically how she ended up off that cliff. Her sons end up calling 911 because she's just knocked out. And they're basically like whispering because they don't want to add certain weight, or they don't want to mess up the whole weight, because they feel like if they do, they're going to end up falling. And I agree with that. You know, maybe something will happen that they just fall. So Bobby and his team end up going over there, and they end up saving those kids. And it was kind of like a touching moment because these kids were basically fighting each other. But now, you know, his older brother is telling him, you know what, you need to go up there. You need to be safe. So he's basically acting like the older brother. And they were able to save every person. Ronda Rousey has a little bit of a bigger part in this show, or in this episode. And that's basically why I didn't really like her acting, because it didn't feel genuine to me. It kind of felt played, and, you know, it felt like an actor. And it just wasn't that good, in my opinion. But I'm sure she's going to end up having more parts in this show. I'm hoping they're not doing all of this because they're going to try to write off Buckey. Or maybe they're just having Ronda Rousey for a little bit, and then she'll end up having an accident, or she'll get transferred somewhere else, and then Buckey might come back in. I'm hoping that's what happened, because I don't want Buckey to actually leave this episode or this season, because I think he's a really good part of this season. So, as I mentioned, Maddy ends up having Athena run a background check on the husband who was supposedly beating his wife, and she basically just doesn't find anything that has to do with battery or assault. So, you know, they're even having a conversation over the phone, and you can tell Maddy is in a car. Now, automatically, I already knew that she's outside of their house. She's basically stalking them to try to find out what's going on. Athena is basically having kind of like a meal set up for Bobby and Buck. Main reason why is because she knows that Bobby was the one who told the fire department, saying that Buck is not ready to come back. But Buck doesn't know that that's what happened. He ends up finding out at that dinner. That's what I told him. And he's just pissed. He ends up just leaving. And I thought he was going to do something stupid. And he does. So now we switch over back to Maddy. As I said, Maddy is outside waiting for something to happen. She ends up hearing some arguments. The husband ends up walking out. And then he kind of like drops his keys. And Maddy just floors it. And I actually thought that Maddy was going to hit him. I thought that that's what was going to happen. But then Maddy just kind of like turns to the right and basically misses him. The guy doesn't even know anything is happening. He basically says, learn how to drive. And it basically cuts off from there. So we get to the scene where Buck is basically talking to that same lawyer who wanted him to testify against the fire department. And he's basically telling Buck, if you decide to go to this route, not only there's two options. You might win and get your job back, or you might lose and you'll never work in a fire department in this city or in any other city. He's basically going to be blacklisted because the fact that he took action against the city. And I thought when he heard that he was just going to back off, but it seems like he's actually going for it. Now, if you've been watching 911, you know that before the 911 call goes out, sometimes there's kind of like a little clip showing how it got to that 911 call. So there's these two sisters. They're trying to sell their mom's belongings, but of course they're in a disagreement about it. Their mom passed away and they're having an estate sale. Now, one of the older sister ends up having a ring that the mother gave to her, And the younger sister is kind of envious about it. She's basically saying she should have been the one that gets it. And she's hoping that she at least keeps it in the family because she knows her sister is known for selling things. And they end up having their drinks, you know, kind of wind down a little bit. She ends up trying on the ring and her hands get nasty. Like there's boils on it, swells up. It just looks gross. And the ring finger, it starts turning purple. It just looks nasty. Now Han has to cut the ring off because the whole reason why it happened was there was a reaction towards like the lemons and the UV and, you know, all that other stuff. And Han has to cut it off. Now, the older sister doesn't want her to do that because she's already sold the ring and she got a pretty good amount for it. So Han basically just cuts it off either way. She cuts it in half, gives one half to the younger sister and another half to the older sister. And you can kind of tell that she's having thoughts about on whether her and her wife should actually have their son have a sibling or not. So they kind of start thinking about it. So I kind of figured that Maddy was going to get more invested into this. I didn't know exactly what she was going to do. I figured she was going to try to follow this girl or do something. And it turns out she finds out that she's a personal trainer. She ends up signing up for a gym membership there. She ends up getting a personal session from her. And it seems like they're going to become friends. Now, I'm thinking what's going to happen is they're going to become good friends. And she starts confiding on Maddy and telling her all the things that's happening. Maddy's going to express that she's been in that same situation. She felt like there was no way out. And she actually left the guy. I don't think she'll go into detail of what actually happened. But I believe she'll tell her that she left him. And maybe things might work out for them. So Eddie's son Christopher, it seems like he's seeing like a therapist, and he's drawing pictures of that whole tsunami, and he's drawing a picture of a girl or of a lady, and she's kind of like in every picture that's there, but they don't know who that is. The therapist doesn't know. He feels like it's his subconscious who's trying to bring somebody out, but he's not talking about it yet. And Eddie ends up finding out that it's his mom that passed away. Eddie ends up telling him that it's okay to be sad and you can actually talk to me about it. And I thought that it was a touching moment for this because you can tell Christopher is going through a hard time having this whole tsunami thing and then having the whole losing his mother thing. So I'm actually glad that they're talking about their story in this series. So here's the moment where Buck, in my opinion, lost some points because he ends up going to Bobby. He ends up telling him that he's going to sue him, the fire department, and the city for wrongful termination. Now, in my opinion, I think he's being selfish because Bobby knows that he's going through some medication stuff, and he knows if that medication affects him during the call, that he's not only putting himself at risk, but he's also putting other people at risk. But it seems like Buckey doesn't comprehend that, or he's just too pissed off that he just doesn't want to hear it. And I thought that the fact that he was actually suing them was really messed up. Now, of course, I can't wait until the next episode shows up. I'm going to continue to talk about this season until they possibly cancel it. Maybe I'll talk about every single episode that comes out. Because from 911, there's always something to talk about. It's always good. So keep in tune to my channel. Comment, like, subscribe. Let me know if there's something you want me to check out. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.